I didn't think it would feel so different. Maddie had stayed over at my house more times than I could count, and sharing my bed was just another part of our routine. But this time, the moment she walked into my room with her suitcase in hand, everything felt charged. She flashed me that brilliant, effortless smile, the one that made her eyes crinkle just slightly at the corners. It was the kind of smile that could light up a room, or apparently turn my insides into a chaotic swirl of nerves and longing. She dropped her bag by the door and flopped onto my bed, letting out a long, exaggerated sigh. "God, I needed this," she said, tilting her head back and closing her eyes for a moment. Her hair spilled over my pillow like a golden wave, and I had to look away quickly, pretending to busy myself with tidying up a non-existent mess on my desk. My pulse hammered in my ears. This was Maddie, my best friend. Maddie, who used to make faces at me during math class when we were 14. Maddie, who stayed up with me all night after my first breakup, armed with tissues and an entire tub of ice cream. So why did everything feel different now? When she opened her eyes and caught me staring, I forced a laugh, brushing it off as nothing. "Rough week?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You have no idea," she groaned, propping herself up on her elbows. "Do you want the long version or the abridged disaster edition?" I smiled despite myself. "Hit me with the disaster edition." "Okay," she said, sitting up fully now. "Picture this. Guy I met on an app, seemed charming, good banter. We go out and he spends half the date talking about his ex, like in detail. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he has the audacity to ask if I'm okay splitting the check because, and I quote, "I'm trying to save up for a PS5. I laughed, the sound bubbling up before I could stop it. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," she said, throwing herself back onto the bed in mock despair. "Honestly, if I wanted to be a therapist, I'd at least charge an hourly rate." Her laughter filled the room, light and musical, and I couldn't help but join in. But even as we joked about the absurdity of her date, I couldn't shake the strange, fluttering sensation in my chest every time she smiled at me, or the way my skin tingled when she playfully nudged my arm. Later that night, we settled into bed as we always did. My bed was small, barely big enough for two people, but that had never bothered us before. Maddie stretched out beside me, pulling the blanket over us and wriggling around until she was comfortable. "You're a human furnace," she teased, her shoulder brushing mine. "Better than freezing to death," I shot back, but my voice felt too loud in the quiet intimacy of the room. I could feel the warmth of her body radiating through the thin fabric of her t-shirt, and the scent of her shampoo, something citrusy and sweet, filled the air between us. We talked for hours just like we always did during these sleepovers. Maddie had a way of making even the most mundane topics feel like adventures. She told me more about her disastrous state, mimicking his voice with such exaggerated drama that I couldn't stop laughing. At one point, tears were streaming down my face, and I had to clutch my stomach from the ache of laughing so hard. But even as we talked, I couldn't ignore the way my thoughts kept drifting. The way her laugh lingered in the air, soft and inviting. The way her hand brushed mine when she gestured, sending tiny jolts through my skin. I tried to push the feelings down, to bury them under layers of denial. Maddie was my best friend. This was just Maddie being Maddie. Her warmth, her humor, her effortless way of making everything feel brighter. And yet, as I lay there in the dim light of my room, watching the soft rise and fall of her chest as she talked, I couldn't help but wonder. Did she feel it too? The weight of something unspoken, simmering just beneath the surface? Or was it all in my head, a cruel trick of my overactive imagination? At one point she caught me staring again. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice softer now, tinged with curiosity. "Nothing," I said too quickly, shaking my head. "I'm just tired." She didn't push, but her gaze lingered for a moment longer before she turned back to her story. I let out a shaky breath, thankful for the reprieve but already missing the weight of her attention. As the hours stretched on, our conversation slowed and the room grew quieter. I tried to focus on the familiar comfort of having Maddie beside me, on the steady rhythm of her breathing and the soft rustle of the blanket as she shifted slightly. But my mind refused to let go of the questions gnawing at me. What if she could feel my heart racing every time our skin brushed? What if she could see the way I bit my lip to keep from staring too long? What if she knew the truth, that every time I closed my eyes, I imagined what it might feel like to close the distance between us and kiss her? And what if she didn't feel the same? I closed my eyes tightly, willing the thoughts away. But as I drifted closer to sleep with Maddie's warmth beside me and her scent filling my senses, I knew there was no escaping it anymore. Something had shifted between us, and no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I couldn't unfeel it. The clock on my bedside table glowed faintly, its digits blinking just past midnight. The room was silent except for Maddie's soft, even breathing beside me. I was still wide awake, my heart an erratic rhythm that refused to settle. I told myself to relax, to close my eyes, to focus on anything but the way her presence filled the tiny space we shared. It didn't work. And then she moved. Her hand brushed mine, barely a touch, the lightest graze of her fingers against my skin, but it might as well have been lightning. The jolt was immediate and all-consuming, and I froze. My breath hitched, caught somewhere in my chest as if it was afraid to escape and betray the storm raging inside me. She shifted again, her weight pressing into the mattress just slightly as she turned her head toward me. "You're quiet tonight," she murmured, her voice low, her tone wrapped in that intimate softness that made my stomach flutter. I wanted to answer her, to deflect with some easy excuse, but my throat felt tight, my mind scrambling for something, anything, that wouldn't give me away. Before I could find the words, she moved again, rolling onto her side to face me. Her eyes, barely visible in the dim glow of the room, found mine. I couldn't look away. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her hand lingering on my arm now. Just the faintest pressure, but enough to set my skin tingling. There was concern in her voice, but there was something else too, something that made my pulse race and my defenses falter. It was subtle, barely there, but undeniable. I tried to laugh, but it came out shaky, unconvincing. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, but the words felt hollow, a lie that even I couldn't believe. My mind was spinning, a mess of tangled emotions I couldn't name and didn't want to face. I should have stopped there, but before I could think better of it, the words tumbled out. "Maddie," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "have you ever thought about us? Like more than just friends?" The second the question was out, the air between us changed. It was as if the entire room had suddenly become smaller, the walls closing in as the silence stretched impossibly long. My heart pounded in my ears, a deafening rush of fear and anticipation. What had I just done? For a moment, Maddie said nothing. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, wide with surprise, maybe even shock. My stomach dropped, dread creeping into the edges of my thoughts. I had ruined everything. The one thing I'd been so afraid of, losing her, losing this, was already slipping away before I could stop it. But then she spoke, her voice soft, careful. "What if I have?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her words hung between us, a spark in the dark that ignited something deep inside me. My breath caught again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something else, hope, longing, disbelief. I searched her face, trying to make sense of what she had just said. "You have?" I asked, the question barely audible, as if saying it louder might shatter the fragile moment. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but there was nervousness there too, a vulnerability that matched my own. "I didn't think I should say anything," she admitted, her hand sliding down my arm, her fingers brushing mine. I didn't know if you ever thought about me that way." I felt like the room had started spinning, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of relief and anticipation and the sheer weight of everything I'd been holding back for so long. "I didn't think I should say anything either," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. "I was scared it would ruin everything." Maddie's gaze softened, her expression unreadable but somehow still comforting. "I get that," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But maybe we've both been too scared for too long." The space between us felt charged, electric. I could feel her warmth, so close now that it was impossible to ignore. My mind screamed 1,000 warnings. Don't mess this up, don't push too far. But my heart drowned them out, louder and more insistent. "Do you think it would ruin everything?" I asked, my voice unsteady. I wasn't sure if I was asking her or myself. Her hand moved, hesitantly but deliberately, until her fingers were intertwined with mine. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it sent a wave of heat through me, a connection that felt more intimate than anything I'd ever known. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But I think I'd rather find out than keep pretending." Her words unlocked something in me. The fear, the doubt, the walls I'd spent years building all seemed to crumble at once, leaving nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth of how I felt. I wanted her, wanted this, more than I'd ever let myself believe. "Maddie," I whispered, her name heavy with everything I couldn't yet say. She leaned in slightly, her face closer now, her breath warm against my skin. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the weight of what was about to happen sinking into the air around us. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force neither of us could resist, we closed the gap. Her lips brushed mine, soft and tentative, and the world seemed to fall away. It wasn't a kiss of certainty or confidence. It was a question, a tentative step into the unknown. And my answer was simple. Yes. The hours that followed felt surreal, like I had stepped into a world I didn't recognize. A world where my heart could finally speak louder than my fear. The room was quiet, the only sounds the faint hum of the city outside and the soft cadence of our voices, both trembling with the weight of everything we had never dared to say. At first, we stumbled through the conversation. Words came hesitantly, careful and fragile, as if we were afraid they might shatter if we moved too quickly. Maddie admitted things that left me breathless. How she had thought about me during lonely nights, wondering if I ever saw her the way she saw me. She spoke with such vulnerability that it made my chest ache. Her words were raw, her voice cracking when she confessed that she had been too scared to lose me, too terrified to take the leap. I used to lie awake at night, she whispered, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on the blanket between us. And I'd think about how things might be different if I just had the courage to tell you. She paused, her gaze flickering to meet mine. But I couldn't stand the thought of ruining what we have. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. That's what I've been afraid of too, I admitted. You're my best friend, Maddie. You mean everything to me. I didn't want to mess it up. Her lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. And yet here we are. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Here we were, hearts laid bare with no way to turn back. I wanted to tell her how long I had felt this way, how deeply I had buried these feelings to protect what we had. But the words got tangled in my chest, too big, too overwhelming to come out. Instead, I reached for her hand, threading my fingers through hers. The simple gesture felt monumental, like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, and I didn't want to. Maddie's eyes softened and she shifted closer, her movements slow and deliberate. My heart pounded in my ears as her face inched toward mine, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. When our lips met, the world seemed to stop. Her kiss was soft, hesitant, yet it carried the weight of everything we had both been holding back. It was like a dam breaking, a flood of emotions spilling out in a way that felt both overwhelming and perfect. Her lips were warm and slightly chapped, but they fit against mine like they had always been meant to. I felt myself melt into her, my body responding instinctively to the closeness. It wasn't just the physicality, it was the connection, the years of unspoken feelings finally finding their voice. My hands found their way to her face, cradling her cheeks as if to ground myself in the reality of what was happening. This wasn't a dream. This was Maddie. My Maddie. When we pulled back, our breaths mingling in the small space between us, I could see the same mix of wonder and trepidation in her eyes that I felt in my own. What does this mean for us? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her hand found mine again, her fingers tightening around mine as if to steady us both. I don't know, she said honestly. But I know I don't want to pretend anymore. I nodded, my chest tightening with both relief and uncertainty. What if this changes everything? She smiled then, a soft, reassuring smile that made my heart ache in the best way. It already has, she said, her thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. But maybe that's okay. Her words gave me the courage to let go of the last of my hesitation. Maddie leaned in again, her body pressing closer to mine, and this time the kiss was deeper, more assured. Her hands found my waist, sliding up beneath my shirt as if asking for permission. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. All I could do was give in to the heat building between us, the undeniable pull that had been there all along. I helped her pull my shirt over my head, my skin tingling where her hands lingered. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning my body with a mix of awe and nervousness that made me blush. But when her gaze met mine, there was only tenderness. I reached for her shirt, my fingers trembling as I lifted it over her head. When it slipped off, I realized she wasn't wearing anything underneath, and for a moment, all I could do was stare. She was beautiful. More beautiful than I had ever let myself fully realize. The air between us grew heavier, charged with a kind of electricity I had never felt before. Her hands roamed my body with a mix of curiosity and reverence, and I felt my own hands exploring her in return. It was uncharted territory for both of us, but it felt so natural, so right. The heat between us grew, our movements becoming bolder, more urgent, until the last barriers between us were gone. When her hands moved lower, her touch tentative yet deliberate, I felt my breath hitch, my body responding in ways I didn't know it could. The sensations were overwhelming, every nerve ending alive with anticipation and need. And when her lips found their way to the most intimate part of me, I couldn't stop the gasp that escaped my lips, my hand flying to cover my mouth in an attempt to stifle the sound. The rest of the night blurred into a haze of touch and heat and emotions so intense that they left me trembling. It was more than just physical. It was intimate in a way I had never experienced, a connection that felt like it reached into the very core of who we were. By the time we finally collapsed into each other, our breathing heavy and our bodies spent, I knew that nothing between us would ever be the same. And somehow that felt like exactly what I had been waiting for all along. The first rays of sunlight crept through the slats of my blinds, casting golden streaks across the room. I blinked against the soft glow, the events of the night before swirling in my mind like a half-remembered dream. But then I felt it, her warmth beside me, the gentle rise and fall of her breath, and the steady weight of her arm draped loosely over my waist. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I turned my head slowly, careful not to disturb her. Maddie lay sprawled across the bed, her hair a chaotic halo of gold against my pillow. Her lips were slightly parted, her face softened in the tranquility of sleep. My heart ached at the sight of her, an ache so deep and overwhelming that it stole the breath from my lungs. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of passion. It was more. It was everything. As I watched her, a flood of thoughts rushed through my mind. Could we handle this? Could we risk what we had built over so many years for something that felt so new, so fragile? But then she stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and all those doubts seemed to fade into the background. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. She smiled, a soft, sleepy smile that made my chest tighten. "Morning," I replied, my voice quieter than usual, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the delicate beauty of the moment. For a while neither of us moved. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, rich with the unspoken. Her hand slid up from my waist, tracing idle patterns on my arm. "So," she began, her tone playful but tentative, "last night wasn't exactly what I expected when I came over." I laughed softly, my cheeks flushing at the memory. "Yeah, me neither." Her fingers stilled and her gaze met mine, more serious now. "Do you regret it?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. I shook my head, reaching up to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. "No," I said firmly. "I don't regret it. Do you?" She hesitated, her teeth catching her bottom lip in that way she always did when she was nervous. Then she shook her head, her expression softening. "No, I don't." Her admission felt like a balm to my racing heart. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relief washing over me. "I want this," I said quietly, my words slow and deliberate. "I don't know what it looks like or how we figure it out, but I want this. I want you." Her eyes glistened and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against mine. "Me too," she whispered. "But let's take it slow, okay? I don't want to screw this up." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Slow sounds good." We stayed like that for a while, tangled together in the soft glow of the morning. It felt safe, like the world outside didn't exist, like nothing could touch us. But eventually reality started to creep back in. Maddie stretched, groaning as she sat up, her hair tumbling over her shoulder in messy waves. "Ugh, I guess I should get going," she said reluctantly. I didn't want her to leave. The thought of her walking out that door, even if it was just for a little while, made my chest tighten. But I nodded, knowing we couldn't stay in this bubble forever. "Yeah," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She started gathering her things, moving around my room in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. As she zipped up her bag, she paused, turning to look at me. Her expression was a mixture of nervousness and hope, her lips quirking into a hesitant smile. "So, does this mean I can stay here again next weekend?" she asked, her voice light but carrying an edge of vulnerability. I laughed, the sound surprising even to me in its ease. My chest felt light, my heart swelling with something that could only be described as joy. "Only if you promise to sleep in my bed again," I teased, my eyes meeting hers. She grinned, the nervousness melting away as she stepped closer, her bag forgotten on the floor. Deal, she said, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to my lips. It was gentle, a promise more than anything else, and it left me breathless. When she finally pulled away, her hand lingered on my cheek, her thumb brushing lightly against my skin. I guess I'll see you next weekend then, she said, her voice warm, her smile brighter than the sunlight streaming through the window. I walked her to the door, the goodbye feeling more bittersweet than it should have. But as I watched her leave, a strange sense of calm settled over me. What started as an ordinary sleepover had become the moment that changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever it was, I knew we'd face it together.